Dr. Kang Minho stared at the ancient stone tablet through the protective glass case. Strange symbols covered its surface like scattered leaves after a storm. He had been looking at similar symbols for 3 years now, and they still made no sense to him. The research station Eternal Pursuit floated in the empty space around Vithara Prime. The dead planet below had once been home to a great civilization. Now it was just gray rock and dust. But the things they left behind still puzzled everyone in the galaxy. Still trying to crack the code, human? The voice belonged to Research Director HFY. The tall lizard-like alien walked up behind Minho with slow, careful steps. His yellow eyes looked down at the young human scientist. Minho turned around and tried to smile. "Just studying the patterns, sir. Maybe if I look long enough, something will click." HFY made a sound that might have been laughter. "My people have been studying these symbols for 800 years. The Etherians have tried for even longer. What makes you think a human can solve this puzzle in just a few years?" The question stung, but Minho kept his face calm. Ever since humans joined the Galactic Consortium 15 years ago, he had heard the same thing over and over. Humans were new. Humans were young. Humans were not smart enough to understand the great mysteries of the galaxy. "Maybe fresh eyes help," Minho said quietly. "Fresh eyes." HFY repeated the words like they tasted bad, or perhaps ignorant eyes. The alien director walked away, his tail dragging behind him on the metal floor. Minho watched him go and felt his stomach twist with anger and shame. He turned back to the tablet and tried to focus on the symbols again. "Don't let him get to you." Commander Park Ji-won appeared beside him. The older human woman had served in the military before becoming a station liaison. She had short gray hair and kind but tired eyes. HFY says the same thing to all the humans here. "Maybe he's right," Minho said. "Maybe we don't belong here." "Nonsense." Then Park Ji-won crossed her arms. "The consortium invited us to join this research. We have every right to be here." Minho looked around the massive research hall. Dozens of alien scientists worked at different stations. There were the tall, thin Sauridians like HFY. The floating crystal beings called Etherians drifted between the displays. The furry Keltons climbed on the walls with their 6 arms. And there were others, strange creatures from worlds Minho could barely imagine. In the middle of all this alien intelligence, the few human scientists looked very small and very young. "Scholar Velnara has been nice to me," Minho said, pointing to one of the Etherian researchers. The crystal being's body glowed with soft blue light as she studied a collection of ancient artifacts. "Velnara is different," Park Ji-won agreed. "She actually listens when humans speak. Most of the others just wait for us to finish talking so they can ignore what we said." They walked together through the research hall. Every wall was covered with displays showing ancient artifacts. Stone tablets, metal plates, crystal rods, and stranger things that had no names in any modern language. All of them covered with the same mysterious symbols. The ancients had left these artifacts on hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. They had built great cities and amazing machines. Their technology was far beyond anything the current galactic civilizations could create. But then they had vanished, leaving only these puzzling symbols behind. "What do you think happened to them?" Minho asked as they stopped in front of a display showing ancient ruins. "The ancients? Nobody knows. The leading theory is that they evolved beyond physical form and became beings of pure energy." "Very romantic idea," Park Ji-won shrugged. "Personally, I think they probably just died out like most civilizations do eventually." A loud sound echoed through the research hall. Emergency lights began flashing red. All the alien scientists stopped their work and looked around with confusion and excitement. "What's happening?" Minho asked. Park Ji-won touched the communication device on her wrist. "Commander Park here. What's the situation?" A voice crackled through the speaker. "We have a discovery team returning from Vithara Prime. They found something big." Within an hour, the research hall was packed with scientists from every species. Everyone wanted to see what the discovery team had brought back. Minho pushed through the crowd until he could see the central display platform. There, under bright white lights, sat the largest ancient artifact anyone had ever found. It was a black stone slab the size of a door. Symbols covered every inch of its surface. But these symbols were different from the ones Minho had seen before. They were larger, more complex, and arranged in strange patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. "Incredible," breathed Scholar Velnara. Her crystal body pulsed with excited light. "The complexity of this script is beyond anything in our databases." HFY moved closer to the artifact. His yellow eyes reflected the light as he studied the symbols. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. If we can decode this, it might give us the key to understanding all ancient writing. Where exactly did you find this? Asked Dr. Yuto, a small Kelton scientist. The Discovery Team leader, a stocky Sauridian named Corkshai, stepped forward. Deep in the ancient city ruins. It was buried under tons of rock and metal. We almost missed it completely. Minho stared at the massive artifact. The symbols seemed to dance in front of his eyes. There were thousands of them, arranged in columns and rows in strange spiral patterns. Some symbols repeated while others appeared only once. It was like looking at a book written in a language that had never existed. We'll need to catalog every symbol, Corkshai announced. I want detailed scans and measurements. We'll compare this with every piece of ancient writing we have. The scientists began to spread out, preparing their equipment and planning their approach. Minho stayed where he was, still staring at the black stone. Something about it bothered him, but he couldn't figure out what. Fascinating, isn't it? Scholar Velnara floated beside him. In all my years of study, I've never seen ancient script this elaborate. How long have you been studying them? Minho asked. 437 years, Velnara replied. I was one of the first Etherian researchers to join this project. Minho felt very young and very stupid. 400 years of study, and they still couldn't read a single ancient word. What hope did he have of contributing anything useful? Don't look so discouraged, Velnara said gently. Her voice sounded like crystal bells ringing. Every researcher brings something different to the work. Even humans, Minho repeated. You make us sound like a special case. All species are special cases. The Sauridians think in long, complex patterns. The Keltons see connections others miss. The Etherians understand energy and light. And humans, she paused, humans see things differently than anyone else. Different how? I'm not sure yet. But I have a feeling we'll find out. As the day wore on, more scientists arrived to study the new artifact. The research hall buzzed with activity and excitement. Teams of specialists worked around the clock, taking measurements and comparing symbols. Minho tried to help, but he felt useless. Every time he suggested something, an alien scientist would politely explain why his idea wouldn't work. They had tried everything he could think of and many things he couldn't. Late that night, when most of the researchers had gone to rest, Minho stood alone in front of the massive black stone. The symbols stared back at him, silent and mysterious. Somewhere in those marks was the secret of an entire civilization. But after 15 years of galactic science working together, they were no closer to solving the puzzle than when they started. A soft sound made him turn around. Park Ji-won was walking toward him through the empty research hall. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much to think about, Minho replied. This artifact could change everything. If we could just figure out what it means. Park Ji-won looked at the stone tablet. You know what's funny? I've been looking at ancient symbols for 3 years now, and I still feel like I'm missing something obvious. What do you mean? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm not a scientist. But sometimes I look at these symbols and think they remind me of something familiar. She shook her head. Probably just my imagination. They stood together in comfortable silence, two humans surrounded by the mysteries of an ancient alien civilization. Tomorrow would bring more tests, more theories, and more frustrated attempts to crack the code. But tonight, they could only wonder what secrets the ancients had taken with them into the darkness. The transport ship docked with Eternal Pursuit at exactly 1400 hours. Minho watched through the observation window as the passengers stepped out of the airlock. Most were diplomats and supply workers making their regular runs. But one passenger stood out from the rest. He was an old human man with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a simple brown jacket and carried a small travel bag. Everything about him said he was tired and didn't want to be here. That must be our veteran, Park Ji-won said, joining Minho at the window. Master Sergeant Lee Do-yeon retired. He's here for the cultural exchange program. He doesn't look happy about it, Minho observed. Would you be? Poor guy probably just wants to enjoy his retirement in peace. Instead, the government sends him to a space station full of aliens. A young woman in military uniform walked beside the old man. She had short black hair and the straight posture of an active duty soldier. She kept looking around nervously at the alien crew members. Who's the woman with him? Minho asked. Captain Kim So-man. She's his escort and translator. Used to be one of his students back in the day. Minho watched as the two humans made their way through the docking bay. Lee Do-hyun moved slowly but steadily, like someone who had learned to save his energy for when it mattered. The aliens working in the docking bay stared at him with curiosity. Humans were still new enough to be interesting. An hour later, Minho found himself in Conference Room 7 with the rest of the research team leadership. Thexai sat at the head of the table, his yellow eyes fixed on the newcomers. Scholar Velnara floated nearby, her crystal body glowing with polite interest. Several other alien scientists filled the remaining seats. Lee Do-hyun sat across from them all, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. Captain Kim So-man sat beside him, her hands folded nervously in her lap. "Welcome to Eternal Pursuit," Thexai said in his formal voice. "We are honored to host a representative of human military culture." "Thank you," Do-hyun replied. His voice was rough and tired. "Though I'm not sure why you want me here. I'm just an old soldier. The cultural exchange program helps us understand different species better," explained Dr. Yuto, the Kelton scientist. "Your military experience gives us insight into human society." Do-hyun made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Human society, right. What do you want to know?" "We fight a lot. We die a lot. We try to keep going anyway." The alien scientists looked uncomfortable. They had probably expected something more inspiring. "Perhaps we could show you our research," suggested Velnara gently. "You might find the ancient civilization interesting." "Ancient civilization?" Do-hyun repeated. "Sure, lead the way." They left the conference room and walked to the main research hall. Minho found himself walking beside Captain Kim So-man. She seemed more relaxed now that they were moving. "How long did you serve under Sergeant Lee?" Minho asked. 5 years, So-man replied. "He was the best tactical instructor I ever had. Taught me everything I know about reading battlefield situations." "Reading battlefield situations?" "You know, looking at terrain, troop positions, supply lines, understanding what's really happening in a fight just by looking at the evidence." She glanced at her old teacher. "The sergeant could look at a battlefield and tell you exactly what had happened there, even days after the fighting ended." They entered the research hall where hundreds of ancient artifacts waited under bright lights. The alien scientists began their practiced explanations, pointing out different types of symbols and discussing various theories about their meaning. Lee Do-hyun listened politely, but without much interest. He nodded when expected and asked a few basic questions, but Minho could tell his mind was somewhere else. They stopped in front of the massive black stone tablet that had been discovered the week before. The symbols covered its surface in complex patterns that still made no sense to anyone. "This is our most recent discovery," Thexai explained proudly. "The most complex ancient script ever found. We believe it may hold the key to understanding their entire writing system." Do-hyun stepped closer to the tablet. For the first time since arriving, he looked truly interested. His tired eyes moved across the symbols, following their patterns from top to bottom. "Interesting," he said quietly. "Do you see something?" asked Velnara hopefully. No, just interesting patterns." But Do-hyun continued to stare at the tablet. His weathered hands moved slightly, as if he was tracing invisible lines in the air. They moved on to other displays, but Minho noticed that Do-hyun kept glancing back at the black stone. Several times the old man stopped walking entirely and turned around to look at it again. "Is everything all right, Sergeant?" Captain Kim So-man asked during one of these pauses. "Fine," Do-hyun said. "Just tired from the trip." But he didn't look tired anymore. He looked alert and focused like a soldier who had spotted something important. The tour continued for another hour. They saw tablets and crystals and metal plates covered with ancient symbols. The alien scientists talked about grammar theories and linguistic patterns and computational analysis. Do-hyun nodded politely through it all. Finally, they returned to the central display area where the black stone tablet waited. Once again, Do-hyun found himself drawn to it. He stood very close to the protective barrier, his eyes moving across the symbols in a pattern that seemed almost familiar. "Huh," he said under his breath. "What was that?" Thexai asked sharply. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." Do-hyun stepped back from the display. "This has been very educational. Thank you for the tour. Would you like to see more tomorrow?" offered Velnara. "We have thousands of artifacts in storage." "Maybe. Right now I think I'd like to rest." Do-hyun looked around the research hall one more time. His gaze lingered on the black stone. Captain Kim, could you show me to my quarters? As they walked away, Minho caught a few words that Do-hyun whispered to his escort. Looks like a tactical deployment map. Captain Kim So-man's response was too quiet to hear, but she glanced back at the ancient tablet with new interest. After the visitors left, the research team gathered around the central display. Several alien scientists seemed disappointed by the veterans' lack of enthusiasm. I had hoped for more insight, admitted Dr. Yuto. Human military perspective could have been valuable. He's just an old soldier, said Thexhai dismissively. What would he know about ancient linguistics? But Minho found himself thinking about Do-hyun's reaction to the black stone tablet. The old man had definitely seen something there, something that made him look alert and interested for the first time all day. Did anyone else notice how he kept looking at the large tablet? Minho asked. Probably just impressed by its size, suggested another scientist. Maybe, Minho said, but he wasn't convinced. That evening, Minho ate dinner in the station's main cafeteria. The room was filled with the usual mix of alien researchers and station crew. Conversations buzzed in a dozen different languages and communication methods. At a corner table, Lee Do-hyun sat alone with a cup of coffee. Captain Kim So-man was nowhere to be seen. The old veteran looked lost in thought, staring out the large windows at the stars beyond. Minho gathered his courage and walked over. Mind if I sit down? Do-hyun looked up and shrugged. Free station. Minho sat across from him. Up close, he could see that the veteran's eyes were sharp and intelligent, despite his tired appearance. There were small scars on his hands and face that spoke of a hard life. What did you think of the research? Minho asked. Impressive operation you have here. A lot of smart people working on a difficult problem. But? Do-hyun smiled slightly. But what makes you think there's a but? The way you looked at that large tablet. Like you recognized something. For a moment, Do-hyun's eyes became very sharp and focused. Then he relaxed and took a sip of his coffee. Maybe it just reminded me of something. Old soldiers see patterns everywhere. Occupational hazard. What kind of patterns? The kind that keep you alive in combat zones. Do-hyun stood up from the table. Thanks for the conversation, Doctor. I should get some rest. He walked away, leaving Minho alone with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. The old veteran had definitely seen something in those ancient symbols. Something that none of the galaxy's greatest scientists had noticed in 800 years of study. Later that night, Minho couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Do-hyun's reaction to the black stone tablet. The way his eyes had moved across the symbols. The whispered comment about tactical deployment maps. Finally, he gave up on sleep and made his way back to the research hall. The massive room was nearly empty at this hour, with only a few alien researchers working the night shift. The ancient artifacts sat in their displays like silent guardians of forgotten secrets. Minho walked to the central platform where the black stone tablet waited. Under the bright white lights, the symbols seemed to pulse with mysterious energy. He had looked at this tablet dozens of times over the past week, but now he tried to see it through different eyes. What would a soldier see when looking at these symbols? What patterns would catch a military mind that linguistic analysis had missed? The symbols were arranged in columns and rows with connecting lines between different groups. Some symbols were larger than others. Some appeared multiple times while others appeared only once. It was like looking at a map or a chart or a deployment map, Minho whispered to himself. Could it be that simple? Could the Minho found Lee Do-hyun in the station's small observation deck the next morning? The old veteran stood alone, looking out at the dead planet Vethera Prime below. His coffee cup sat cooling on a nearby table. Sergeant Lee, Minho said quietly, do you have a minute to talk? Do-hyun turned around. His sharp eyes studied Minho's face. You look like you didn't sleep much, Doctor. I kept thinking about what you said yesterday. About the symbols looking like a tactical deployment map. Did I say that? Do-hyun's voice was careful and neutral. You whispered it to Captain Kim, I heard you. Minho stepped closer. You saw something in that tablet, didn't you? Something the rest of us missed. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. You really want to know what I think? Yes. I think your ancient symbols look like military notation. The kind soldiers use to mark troop positions and supply routes. Do-hyun set down his cup. But that's impossible, right? Your alien friends have been studying this stuff for hundreds of years. They would have noticed something that obvious. No, maybe not. Maybe it takes someone with military experience to recognize military symbols. Maybe. Do-hyun looked back out the window. Or maybe an old soldier is seeing things that aren't there. Minho felt excitement building in his chest. Can you show me? Can you explain what you see? Do-hyun was quiet again. Then he sighed. Why not? I'm probably wrong anyway. They made their way back to the research hall. It was early morning, so most of the scientists were still sleeping or eating breakfast. The massive room felt empty and peaceful. They stopped in front of the black stone tablet. Do-hyun studied it for a moment, then pointed to a group of symbols in the upper left corner. See these marks here? In military notation, symbols like that usually indicate unit positions. The size of the symbol tells you how many troops. The shape tells you what kind of unit. What kind of unit? Hard to say without knowing their system. But if I had to guess, Do-hyun traced invisible lines with his finger. Infantry units. Maybe armored support. The way they're arranged suggests a defensive formation. Minho stared at the symbols with new eyes. What had looked like random marks now seemed organized and purposeful. And these lines connecting different groups? Minho asked. Communication routes, supply lines, chain of command. Do-hyun moved his finger across the tablet. This whole thing reads like a battlefield report. Troop positions, enemy movements, tactical situation. Enemy movements. Do-hyun pointed to another section of the tablet. These symbols here are different from the others. Arranged differently. If this is what I think it is, these represent hostile forces. Minho felt his heart racing. So the ancients were at war? If I'm right, yes. And from the look of this tablet, it was a big war. Multiple fronts, massive troop deployments. Do-hyun stepped back from the display. But like I said, I'm probably wrong. Your expert linguists would have figured this out already if it was true. Maybe not. Maybe we've been looking at this the wrong way for centuries. Dr. Kang. The voice came from behind them. They turned to see HFY approaching with several other alien scientists. The Sauridian director looked angry. What are you doing here so early? Just showing Sergeant Lee some of our artifacts, Minho said quickly. I see. And what does our military expert think of our ancient civilization? HFY's voice was cold and mocking. Do-hyun looked at Minho, who nodded encouragingly. Well, sir, these symbols remind me of military tactical notation, like the kind we use to mark troop positions and battle plans. The alien scientists exchanged glances. Several of them made sounds that indicated amusement or disbelief. Military notation, repeated Dr. Yuto slowly. You think the ancients were soldiers? I think this particular tablet might be a military document, yes. Ridiculous, said HFY flatly. The ancients were an advanced, peaceful civilization. We have studied their culture for 800 years. There is no evidence of military activity. Maybe you haven't been looking for the right kind of evidence, Do-hyun said calmly. Are you suggesting that we have missed something obvious for centuries? HFY's yellow eyes narrowed dangerously. That human military experience is somehow superior to Galactic Consortium scientific analysis? I'm not suggesting anything. Just sharing what I see. Scholar Velnara floated closer to the group. Her crystal body pulsed with nervous light. Perhaps we should consider the possibility. Human perspective might offer new insights. New insights? HFY turned his anger toward the Etherian scientist. These symbols predate human civilization by millions of years. How could a human possibly understand them better than we do? Because sometimes fresh eyes see what experienced eyes miss, Minho said, trying to support Do-hyun. Fresh eyes. Again with the fresh eyes. HFY's tail lashed against the floor. Do you realize how arrogant that sounds? My people have devoted their lives to understanding the ancients. Scholars like Velnara have spent centuries in study. And you think a human soldier can solve our greatest mystery in a single day? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Other alien scientists had gathered around, drawn by the sound of argument. Minho could see curiosity and skepticism in their faces. Nobody's trying to solve anything, Do-hyun said quietly. I'm just telling you what the symbols look like to me. What they look like to you, HFY repeated. A primitive human warrior who has never studied xenolinguistics or ancient civilizations. That's enough. Park Ji-won's voice cut through the argument. The commander had arrived with Captain Kim So-man close behind her. Sergeant Lee is our guest here. He deserves respect. Respect, yes. but not credulous acceptance of wild theories. Thexai pointed at the black stone tablet. This artifact represents the pinnacle of ancient achievement. It is not some crude military document. How do you know? Asked Captain Kim Soman. Everyone turned to look at the young officer. She stepped forward nervously but kept talking. I mean, how do you know it's not military? Have you tested that theory? We don't need to test impossible theories, said Dr. Yuto. The ancients were clearly a transcendent civilization. They evolved beyond the need for warfare. Says who? Salman's voice was getting stronger. Maybe they were just better at fighting than everyone else. This is absurd, Thexai declared. I will not waste time on human fantasies. The research will continue according to established scientific methods. He turned and walked away, his tail dragging behind him. Several other alien scientists followed, muttering among themselves in their various languages. But not all of them left. Scholar Vilnara remained, along with a few others who looked thoughtful rather than dismissive. Don't take it personally, Vilnara said to Do-hyun. Thexai has devoted his entire career to ancient studies. Your theory challenges everything he believes. I understand, Do-hyun replied. I've seen the same thing in the military. Sometimes old ideas die hard. The question is whether your idea has any merit, said Dr. Nexara, a tall, Etherian researcher. How would we test such a theory? Compare these symbols to known military notation systems, suggested Minho. Look for patterns that match tactical documentation. Human military notation systems, Dr. Nexara corrected. What if ancient military practices were completely different? Then we look for other patterns. Movement indicators, hierarchy markers, strategic symbols. Do-hyun pointed back at the tablet. Military minds think alike across species. The basics don't change much. Park Ji-won stepped forward. I think we should at least explore the possibility. What's the harm in looking at the evidence from a different angle? The harm, came Thexai's voice from across the research hall, is that we waste time and resources on amateur speculation. The Soridian director had returned with a group of senior researchers and station administrators. They formed a circle around the humans and their few alien supporters. Commander Park, said Administrator Kexhai, a elderly Soridian with pale green scales. I understand you wish to support your fellow humans, but this research station has protocols and standards. We cannot allow unqualified personnel to interfere with scientific work. Sergeant Lee is here as part of an official cultural exchange program, Park Ji-won replied stiffly. Cultural exchange, yes. Not scientific research. I'm afraid I must ask that your military personnel limit themselves to observational activities only. Minho felt anger burning in his chest. You're making a mistake. What if he's right? What if we've been wrong about the ancients all this time? Then 800 years of galactic science has been worthless, said Thexai coldly. Which do you think is more likely, Dr. Kang? That the greatest minds in the galaxy have missed something obvious? Or that an old human soldier is seeing patterns that don't exist? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Minho looked around at the faces surrounding them. Most of the alien scientists seemed convinced that the humans were wrong. Only a few looked uncertain. Lee Do-hyun cleared his throat. If I may, sirs, I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm not trying to overthrow your research. I'm just telling you what I see when I look at those symbols. And what you see contradicts centuries of established science, Administrator Kexhai said firmly. I think it would be best if you confined your remaining visit to non-research areas of the Sainti. 3 days passed before Minho worked up the courage to approach Lee Do-hyun again. He found the veteran in the station's small library, reading an old book about Earth military history. The room was quiet and empty, away from the main research areas. Sergeant Lee, Minho said quietly. Are you busy? Do-hyun looked up from his book. Just passing time, Doctor. What can I do for you? Minho sat down across from him. I can't stop thinking about what you said, about the ancient symbols being military notation. Thought the official word was to forget about that. Officially, yes, but some of us think you might be onto something. Minho leaned forward. Scholar Velnara and Dr. Nexara want to help, unofficially. Do-hyun closed his book and studied Minho's face. Unofficial research could get you in trouble. Maybe, but what if you're right? What if we've been looking at this wrong for centuries? For a long moment, Do-hyun said nothing. Then he sighed. All right, but we do this quietly. No announcements, no official reports. Just a few people looking at some symbols that night, After most of the station had gone to sleep, Minho met with a small group in Storage Bay 7. Scholar Velnara was there, her crystal body glowing softly in the dim light. Dr. Nexara had come as well, along with 2 younger Etherian researchers named Zilnara and Kevnara. Lee Dohyun arrived last, accompanied by Captain Kim Soman. The old veteran looked around the storage bay with professional interest. "Good place for a secret meeting," he said approvingly. "No monitoring equipment, multiple exit routes." "Let's get started," said Velnara. She activated a portable display unit that showed detailed images of the Blackstone tablet. "We need to test your theory systematically." "How?" asked Soman. "By comparing ancient symbols to known military notation systems," explained Dr. Nexara. "If Sergeant Lee is correct, we should find consistent patterns." They spent the next 4 hours going through the symbols one by one. Dohyun explained what each mark reminded him of in human military notation: unit positions, supply routes, command structures, defensive formations. "This symbol here appears 19 times on the tablet," noted Zilnara. "Always in the same relative position to other symbol groups. In human notation, that would indicate a standard unit type," said Dohyun. "Maybe infantry squads or armored companies, something that appears in multiple places during a battle." "And these connecting lines?" asked Kevnara. "Communication networks. Or maybe supply chains. Hard to say without more context." They worked through the night, building a database of symbol meanings based on Dohyun's military experience. Slowly, patterns began to emerge from the ancient marks. "Look at this section," said Soman, pointing to a cluster of symbols. "If these represent enemy forces, then this whole area shows them being pushed back." "A tactical retreat," agreed Dohyun. "Or maybe a strategic withdrawal to better positions. But retreating from what?" asked Velnara. They studied the tablet in silence. The symbols that Dohyun identified as enemy forces were indeed arranged differently from the others. They appeared in scattered groups, without the organized formations that marked the friendly units. "Maybe the ancients were fighting something that didn't use traditional military organization," suggested Nexara. "Like what?" "Unknown. But the pattern suggests an enemy that attacked in waves or swarms, rather than organized units." As the hours passed, their understanding of the tablet grew. What had seemed like random symbols now told a story of military conflict on a massive scale. Troop movements, supply problems, tactical decisions, and strategic retreats. "My God," whispered Minho. "If this is real, the ancients weren't a peaceful civilization at all. They were a military empire." "An empire at war," corrected Dohyun. "And from the looks of this tablet, they were losing." The group worked for 3 more nights, analyzing every symbol on the massive stone tablet. They developed a consistent translation key based on military notation principles, and slowly the full scope of the ancient conflict became clear. "This is incredible," said Velnara on their 4th night together. "According to our analysis, this tablet describes a war that lasted for thousands of years." "A war against who?" asked Soman. "We're not sure, but the enemy forces are consistently shown advancing across multiple star systems." Nexara highlighted sections of the tablet on their display. "The ancients were fighting a defensive war across half the galaxy. And losing," added Dohyun grimly. "Look at the progression from top to bottom. Each section shows more enemy advances and fewer ancient defensive positions. They had been so focused on their work that none of them noticed the storage bay door opening. Bright light flooded the room as Research Director Thexhai entered with Administrator Kexhai and several security officers. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded Kexhai. The human and alien researchers froze like children caught stealing cookies. Their portable displays showed clear evidence of unauthorized research into the ancient artifacts. "We were just conducting some informal analysis," said Velnara carefully. "Informal analysis. In secret, using unauthorized personnel." Thexhai's yellow eyes fixed on Lee Dohyun. "I should have known the humans would ignore our directives." "Sir, we think we've made a breakthrough," said Minho quickly. "The ancient symbols do appear to be military notation. We've developed a translation key that shows consistent patterns." "Translation key?" Kexhai's voice was dangerously quiet. "Based on what academic authority?" "Based on practical military experience," said Dohyun. "These symbols follow the same basic principles as tactical notation used by fighting forces across multiple species." "Ridiculous," snorted Thexhai. You cannot decode an alien language using human military experience. Why not? Asked Somin. If the symbols represent military concepts, then military knowledge is exactly what you need to understand them. Because the ancients were not a military civilization. Thexai's voice echoed through the storage bay. 800 years of research proves they were an advanced, peaceful society. What if 800 years of research was wrong? Asked Dr. Nexara quietly. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Kexai's pale scales turned almost white with anger. Dr. Nexara, you will report to my office immediately. Your research privileges are suspended pending a full investigation. He turned to the other alien scientists. The same applies to all of you. And the humans? Asked Thexai. The humans will be removed from the research station immediately. This cultural exchange program is terminated. Now wait just a minute, said Park Ji-won from the doorway. The commander had arrived with additional security personnel. You can't throw our people off the station without cause. Unauthorized research into classified materials is cause enough, replied Kexai coldly. Sir? Said Velnara desperately. At least look at our findings. We may have solved the greatest mystery in galactic history. You have solved nothing. You have contaminated valid research with amateur speculation. Kexai gestured to the security officers. Confiscate all their data and equipment. As the security team moved to collect their portable displays and notes, Do-hyun stepped forward. Before you destroy our work, let me ask you something. What if we're right? What if the ancients really were at war? What if that war never ended? What do you mean? Asked one of the security officers. I mean, what if the enemy forces shown on this tablet are still out there? What if the ancients didn't disappear because they evolved beyond physical form? What if they were wiped out by an enemy that's still advancing across the galaxy? The room fell silent. Even Thexai seemed shaken by the implications. That's impossible, said Kexai, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? When was the last time anyone explored the far edge of ancient space? When was the last time anyone investigated what happened to their outlying colonies? No one had an answer for that. Look, said Do-hyun, pulling out a small datapad. We copied some of our analysis before you arrived. At least take this and have your experts review it. If we're wrong, you've lost nothing. If we're right, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Kexai stared at the datapad for a long moment. Finally, he reached out and took it. You have 24 hours, he said quietly. Then the humans leave the station. And if this analysis proves to be worthless fantasy, the responsible scientists will be banned from consortium research permanently. As the administrators and security officers left the storage bay, the small group of researchers looked at each other with a mixture of hope and fear. 24 hours, said Minho. Think it's enough time? It has to be, replied Do-hyun. Because if we're right about this war still going on, 24 hours might be all the galaxy has left. 18 hours later, Emergency Protocol 7 was activated across the research station. All civilian personnel were ordered to emergency stations while military vessels took defensive positions around Vethera Prime. Something was happening in the outer system, and it was big. Minho found himself in the main command center with the rest of the research team. Large displays showed sensor readings from the system's edge, where long-range scanners had detected something impossible. Multiple contacts approaching from deep space, reported the sensor officer. Configuration unknown. Energy signatures don't match any known vessel types. Administrator Kexai stood in the center of the command room, his pale scales now completely white with fear. How many contacts? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They're still too far out for accurate counts. Research Director Thexai approached the main display screen. His yellow eyes studied the sensor data with growing horror. The approach vector matches the ancient records. They're coming from the same direction the enemy forces originated in the translated tablets. All eyes turned to Lee Do-hyun, who stood quietly near the back of the command center. The old veteran had been proven right about the ancient symbols being military notation. In the past 18 hours, teams of expert linguists had confirmed his analysis. The black stone tablet and dozens of other artifacts were indeed tactical reports from an ancient war, a war that apparently wasn't over. Sergeant Lee, called Kexai, your analysis suggested the ancient enemy might still be active. Do you have any insights about these approaching contacts? Do-hyun stepped forward and studied the sensor displays. Hard to say without more information. But if these are the same forces that fought the ancients, they've been traveling for a very long time to get here. Traveling from where? Unknown. But the ancient records show this enemy advancing system by system across thousands of years. They don't seem to stop or settle anywhere. They just keep moving forward. Captain Kim So-man joined her old teacher near the main display. What do you think they want? Same thing they've always wanted, probably. Territory, resources, or maybe they just destroy everything they find. Do-hyun pointed to the approaching contacts. Question is, what do we do about it? We run, said Dr. Yuto immediately. Evacuate the station and retreat to consortium space. And then what? Asked Commander Park Ji-won. If these forces destroyed the ancients, what makes you think modern civilization can stop them? The ancients had advanced technology far beyond our current capabilities, added Scholar Velnara. If they couldn't win this war, how can we? The command center fell silent as everyone considered the implications. The greatest civilization in galactic history had fought this enemy for thousands of years and lost. What hope did the current species have? Maybe we can't win, said Do-hyun quietly. But maybe we can learn from ancient mistakes. What do you mean? Asked Kexhai. The ancient tablets show a civilization fighting a defensive war, always retreating, always giving ground. They never seem to have taken the offensive. Perhaps because they couldn't, suggested Kexhai. The enemy might have been too powerful for direct attack. Or maybe they just didn't think like soldiers. Do-hyun looked around the command center. The ancients had amazing technology and advanced science. But did they have military leaders? Professional soldiers? People who understood warfare as a discipline? We don't know, admitted Velnara. Our understanding of ancient society is still limited. Well, we have something the ancients didn't have, said Commander Park Ji-won firmly. What's that? Humans. A few alien scientists made sounds that might have been laughter, but the sound died quickly as they realized she was serious. Commander Park is right, said Do-hyun. Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We've learned things about combat that other species might not know. Such as? Asked Kexhai skeptically. Coordination between different forces. Combined arms tactics, strategic deception, asymmetric warfare. Do-hyun counted off on his fingers. The ancient records show them fighting each enemy wave as a separate battle. They never seem to have developed integrated battle plans. You're suggesting human military knowledge could make a difference against an enemy that destroyed the ancients? Kexhai's voice was full of disbelief. I'm suggesting it might be worth trying. What's the alternative? Before anyone could answer, new alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The sensor officer called out in an urgent voice. Contacts have changed course. They're heading directly for our position. Time to intercept? Approximately 6 hours at current speed. 6 hours. Minho felt his stomach clench with fear. In 6 hours, they would face an enemy that had been advancing across the galaxy since before human civilization existed. All ships are to prepare for evacuation immediately, ordered Kexhai. We'll withdraw to the inner systems and alert Consortium Command. Sir, interrupted Do-hyun, request permission to examine the ancient military records one more time before we evacuate. Why? Because those records might contain tactical information we can use. The ancients lost this war, but they fought it for thousands of years. They must have learned something about enemy capabilities and weaknesses. Kexhai hesitated. Very well. You have 2 hours. Then we evacuate whether you found anything or not. The next 2 hours were the most intense of Minho's life. The entire research team worked together, humans and aliens side by side, racing through ancient military records with desperate urgency. Lee Do-hyun directed the analysis, his military experience guiding them toward tactical information hidden in the ancient symbols. Here, said So-man, pointing to a section of text from a smaller tablet, this describes enemy attack patterns. They seem to prefer overwhelming force against fixed positions. Classic swarm tactics, observed Do-hyun, probably effective against ancient defensive strategies. And this section, added Velnara, highlighting another tablet. It describes successful ancient counterattacks. Small mobile forces targeting enemy supply concentrations. Guerrilla warfare, translated Do-hyun. Hit-and-run tactics. The ancients had some success when they abandoned traditional defensive positions. They found more references to successful tactics, scattered throughout the ancient records. Mobile defense, strategic withdrawal, supply line interdiction, and coordinated strikes from multiple directions. The ancients had learned these lessons, but apparently too late to save their civilization. "We need to get this information to Consortium Command," said Park Ji-won. "If we're going to fight this enemy, we need every advantage we can get." "Agreed," said Keksai. "But first we need to survive the next few hours." The evacuation began immediately. Research ships and transport vessels departed the station carrying personnel and the most important artifacts. But as the last ships prepared to leave, the approaching enemy forces increased their speed. "They're going to intercept us before we reach safe distance," reported the sensor officer. "All available warships are to form a defensive screen," ordered Keksai. Buy the transport's time to escape. It wasn't much of a fleet. 3 consortium patrol ships and a handful of armed research vessels, against thousands of enemy contacts with unknown capabilities, sir, said Do-hyun. "I'd like to volunteer for the defensive action." "You're a retired ground soldier, Sergeant." "This is a space battle." "Yes, sir, but I've studied these ancient records more than anyone else. If the enemy uses the same tactics they did thousands of years ago, I might be able to predict their movements." Keksai considered this for a moment. "Very well. You'll coordinate with Fleet Command from the station. Dr. Kang, Scholar Velnara, you'll assist him with tactical analysis." The next hour was a blur of activity as the small consortium fleet took defensive positions around the evacuating transports. Enemy contacts grew larger on the sensor screens, resolving into ship configurations unlike anything in modern databases. "They're not using standard formation patterns," observed the fleet commander. "Individual ships operating independently, but maintaining overall coordination. Classic swarm behavior," said Do-hyun from the station. "Ancient records describe the same thing. They'll probe for weaknesses first, then concentrate overwhelming force against the weakest point. How do we counter that? Don't present them with a weak point. Keep your formation fluid and mobile. When they start to concentrate, shift position and force them to regroup." The battle began as the enemy forces entered weapons range. Strange energy beams and projectile weapons opened fire on the consortium ships. But instead of the overwhelming assault everyone expected, the enemy forces probed carefully, testing the defensive screen for vulnerabilities. "They're being cautious," noted Velnara. "The ancient records suggest they prefer overwhelming victories to costly battles." "Good," said Do-hyun. "That gives us an advantage. Keep moving. Keep them guessing about our capabilities." For 20 minutes, the battle continued as a series of probing attacks and defensive maneuvers. The consortium fleet, guided by Do-hyun's analysis of ancient tactics, managed to avoid serious damage while inflicting casualties on the enemy forces. But gradually, the enemy began to adapt. Their attacks became more coordinated and focused. Several consortium ships took heavy damage and were forced to withdraw. "We can't hold them much longer," reported the fleet commander.